Welcome to Digitally Creative. I'm your host, Vincent Ferrari, and joining me this week is a good friend of mine. He's been a good friend for a long time. He's a motivator, he's an ass kicker, and he's one of those guys who, when you're feeling like your butt's a little cold, he'll be willing to light a fire under it. This is my good friend, Chance Canary. What's going on, Chance? How you doing?
Doing well, my man. I appreciate it. That's a wow. I wasn't expecting that kind of invitation
Oh,
or introduction, should I say? But I appreciate it.
Oh, that's how I introduce people. When especially one of the things I love doing, and I've told people this in the past, is I love having my friends on the show.
Yeah.
Not just people who I admire or people who do cool making stuff, but people who are actually my friends because I feel like the conversation just kind of goes where it goes. And one of the things that I've always loved about you, and one of the reasons I think we clicked from the beginning, is we have a very similar mindset as far as you know keeping your ass moving and keeping yourself going. And every once in a while I'll be in that mood where it's like I don't want to do anything today, and you'll post some long, and you got to see his stories. If you're not following Chance, he has two different Instagram accounts because they don't like him very much. But he posts these great stories, just white text on black backgrounds, just telling you to get off your ass in multiple ways, multiple times. And I'll tell you, man, sometimes that's exactly what I need to hear. So why don't you give everybody a little bit of an introduction to who you are and what you do as a maker, and we'll go from there.
My name's Chance Canary. I live just outside of the Birmingham metro area in Alabama. Live in a little town called Pell City, and that's kind of my location. I was born in California. I've lived in Alabama for 28ish years. So Alabama, I essentially claim born and bred, but uh, as you put it when we were chopping it up before we went live, I was born and then my family got some sense and got the hell out of Dodge. So but man, it's been a journey. I was born into I'll say underprivileged family.
Hmm.
My parents had me extremely young. My mom was 17, my dad was 20 when I was born.
Oh wow,
Yeah, and
wow.
my so I grew up with my parents, and
Mhm.
it's I mean, dude, at 20 years old, my dad was 40. So
That's
like
wild. Like I have when I was 20, I had friends that were 40, and I'm just realizing, like, wow, your parents were basically not your
yeah,
age, but not that far from your age to where you could
dude.
like socialize with
s-
your parents.
So even crazier, when I was 20, my mom was 34. Like,
Wow,
bro, I just turned well, I'll be 31 in July. So at 30 years old, my mom had a 13-year-old.
that's crazy.
So like or no, my mom was 20. My mom was 37 when I was 20. I did the math wrong. I never said I was good at math.
Hey, when I
But
started when I started college, my first girlfriend, I was 19, she was 37. So I mean, nothing weird about that at all.
hell yeah, ain't nothing wrong with being a cub. Come here, cougar. Um, but
Wow.
but no, man. So like my success, I say this in like I love my parents. They've never done me wrong in any kind of way.
Mhm.
I just like, and I make this abundantly clear every time I talk about it. Um, we don't know what we don't know.
Right.
And my parents provided for me the best possible way they could. They kind of put themselves behind the eight ball. The first time my parents had sex, they got pregnant with me. So like, put that in your hat. Um,
Wow.
yeah, and they were in California, man. And my dad was he worked for the Bridge Builders Union, and just I mean he made decent money, but it was I mean in California, $23 an hour is nothing. That's almost
Right.
minimum wage out there, even back then.
That's
And
subsistence living almost.
dude, it's yeah, like that's Section 8 type stuff there.
Yeah.
And so my uncle who had previously moved to California, my dad used to come out here in the summers to Alabama and visit with my uncle. My uncle is a car dealer, used car dealer, but a little bit bigger than that. He has a whole like body shop operation where excuse me, he'll he's got insurance contracts, so he'll buy the insurance vehicles, fix them up, flip them, sell them, buy, sell, flip. He's got a whole thing. So my dad would come out in the summers and work on cars, just the opportunity to get away from the chaos of California and come down here. And my uncle, when my dad came out here the last time, he had he told my dad, he's like, here's a plane ticket, go get your wife and kid. He said, and bring him home. He said, there's nothing for you in California anymore. There's no opportunity out there. If you want to make something of yourself, you need to, you know, come out here. We'll set you up. You know, and my uncle is really the reason like my parents even had a shot. Um,
Wow.
he had a property that had a double wide trailer on it, and I think my parents were paying 400 or 500 bucks a month. And my dad dropped out of high school in 10th grade, I think. Went straight into the work. He just decided, he was like, school's pointless for me. Went to work, and my mom has a high school education with like a couple of like professional ish type night classes. She'd worked in several like paralegal offices and stuff. But I mean, she had me, I think, 6 months left into her senior year, and
Wow.
yeah, I mean 17. So my mom had me. Well, in July she had me in that summer. So she went through. She had me as a junior in high school, and and so we moved out here. Really young parents. My dad became a mechanic um, by trade. Worked on vehicles for 20 plus years, and so they didn't really have a whole lot.
Hmm.
Supporting a kid with a household income of like $32,000 is not easy. And I remember a lot of my childhood, especially up until about the time I was 6. We were very, when I was up until I was 4, we were very, I don't want to say poor, but we were not making ends meet barely. And
Paycheck to
then
paycheck. Kind of the way I that's kind of the way I grew up too. I wouldn't say I was poor either, but it was a lot of paycheck to
very
paycheck
lower
stuff.
middle class.
Yeah.
And then like my dad had worked his way up. He was making $22 an hour or something like that as a mechanic. He's a master technician. And my mom was running a debt collection agency. And then one of the uh, the managing partners or something decided to go out on his own, and he took a lot of the clients with him. He didn't like where the direction of that business was going, and he hired my mom in as like the COO. And so from 4 to 5, my parents' income, my mom went to making 6 figures by herself,
Wow.
and which was astronomically different. And then, my parents were like, okay, well, we've got, an opportunity here, blah, 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 blah. And they decided to try for another kid since they were going to be able to afford it.
Hmm.
So they had my sister. And from that was when I was 6. By the time I was 9, her boss, so about a 4-year run, they made astronomical amounts of money. And I'll never forget when it happened. The boss sold the company for like $110 million and just left everybody. Like overnight, everyone found, like, never told anybody he was selling the company or nothing.
Jeez.
Checked, like, he checked it. The word was he cleared 80 million after taxes and paid out whoever. No severance packages, no nothing. Sold the company for 100 plus, and left his wife, left his kids, just disappeared. And when he hit the checkout button, he hit the checkout button. So
Holy crap.
my parents went from finding out they were making just south of 200 a year to they were on my dad's salary, which was like 50ish. And my sister has health issues. She's got epilepsy and seizures and all this other kind of stuff. And we went right back to lower middle class, man. I enjoyed a lot from 5 to 8 or 9, and then I mean we almost ended up back on food. Actually, at one point we were on food stamps. Um, and so like growing up to kind of transition into where my making stuff came in. My dad's only solitude was time in the shop. He had to do
Hmm.
something with his hands to stay busy because if he was in the house, seeing my mom's stress and this, that, and the other, my dad took $1,200 at the time. I think he sold a motorcycle or something. I don't remember where he actually got the seed money from. Um, but he took 1,200 bucks and he built a 12 by 20 shop. And that was our shop until I was 22 years old.
Wow.
Um, yeah, dude. And and like my passion for making was I didn't even know what I was learning. I just wanted, I was my dad was my best friend and I
Mhm.
was his little helper, right? Like my dad, instead of toys as a kid, like I got a hammer and a block of wood. Like so like I'm just mimicking dad, like all the way down to I watched my dad hit his thumb with a hammer. Dad said it was the funniest thing in the world. He smacked his thumb with a hammer and made a commotion out of it. So me as a kid, I'm like, oh, okay. Wow. And then we're both screaming, right? And with my little, the little hammers with that used to come in the toolkits, like you could unscrew the handle and it had like a Phillips or a flathead screwdriver or
Mhm,
whatever in
mhm.
it. I had one of those. I'm not gonna say it was the best parenting move to give me a real hammer to play with, but
My dad gave
whatever.
me real hammers too. My dad was a carpenter, and
Yeah,
it's funny
and
you say you were learning, you were kinda learning too, because that was something when I started woodworking, I didn't realize how much I always said I was bummed out that I never learned from my dad because my dad was a great carpenter. I always said I never learned from my dad. And it turns out I actually learned a lot from my dad, and I didn't know it until I started taking the woodworking classes. And I was like, "Oh yeah, I know this already. Oh yeah, I know this already." And you start realizing like just how much over time spending time with your dad as a kid, how much you actually take in through osmosis.
oh my god, dude, I gave a speech the other day about and I was talking about that. Like, there's not a day that goes by that I don't have like this epiphany moment
Mhm.
where I'm like, damn, that's what that meant, or that's what they did,
That's
right?
why he did that.
Like growing up, my parents used to tell me like, you're not gonna understand this, but the day you do, and like that switch flips, and you're like, oh,
Like,
okay.
you people
I'm not.
aren't insane.
I'm never gonna give them the satisfaction of that of being like, I get it, but that's dude. Like you
Well,
said, I learned it through osmosis.
as a kid, it's interesting because your upbringing is, I mean, obviously, you were probably in a more dire situation than I was growing up. I'm not gonna sit here and try to
I, I
whip them
never
out and put them on
wanted
the
for
table and
anything.
compare.
Right. Yeah. I mean, there's no one upper thing here. Like,
Yeah,
to be clear, like, my parents always provided, and what
right.
I think is on a very high level.
A
I don't
and
know any
that's
different. So,
so as a kid, when you're in it, you don't fully appreciate it. You just kinda see money's always a struggle, right? Money's always a thing. Money's always this thing on the table somewhere. But as you got older, when did you start to realize, like, "Wow, my parents really pulled off a freaking miracle with me and my sister?" Like, because you had to have that moment at some point where you went, "Wow, how did they get this done at all? Like, I don't understand."
I'm gonna be honest, dude. I still don't understand it. Because like my mom is fantastic with spinning gold out of nothing.
Mhm.
Like, she is the miracle worker when it comes to that kind of stuff. And I'm not going to sit here and say they're the best financially, even to this day, but like, even still, like, seeing what they did with what they didn't have,
Right.
like, dude, I know what I panic about, but like you were saying, like, when did I noticed things were, I think because I went through a range of motions, right?
Mhm.
Like, I think how old are you?
I'm 47.
Okay, so you're quite a ways older than me. So like my generation was the generation of like I saw everything. I remember
Mhm.
no internet, no cell phone. I remember rotary dial phones like but I grew up through all of that in the timeline with it.
Mhm.
So like I remember friends getting internet before us
Mhm.
or I remember friends having like their own phone line in their room and like we had a phone line, right? Like so if
Mhm.
mom
And
was
it
on
was
the
in the
phone.
kitchen.
Well, I will say, like, my parents, like, got tired of, like, staying in the kitchen, so, like, they splurged on a cordless phone, right? That was the thing, and, like, dude, do you remember when, like, the translucent plastic fad happened? Like,
Oh, yeah.
everything was, like, translucent
Oh, yeah.
and stuff, so, like, yeah, I mean, dude, that was what? You were 20 through that fad.
Yeah.
So, that, like
That was like the late '80s and early '90s was
dude,
when
so
translucent
I
stuff started
but
happening.
it all like when the original like Mac computers came out, like
Mhm.
the first,
The
they
iMacs,
had
yeah.
the first like translucent ones was kind of like that time period, like where I remember like all the cell phones were going to like a translucent color,
Mhm.
computers, TVs, like even the little TVs and stuff,
Mhm.
and like as that stuff started coming out was right when my parents transitioned into their what I call their wealth period.
Mm-hmm.
And when you go from, they tried to do things right, but it went severely chaotic. So like they went from being super poor to making ends meet to stupid money. I
Right.
mean, my mom making her, I think her base salary was like 120, 130, but she could bonus twice a year for up to $35,000 each. And there was 3 straight years she never missed a bonus. So like my mom by herself was making 160 ish. My dad was 40 to 50 depending on work.
Mm-hmm.
Cuz he didn't get paid by the hour, he got paid by the job.
Mm-hmm.
Um so I went from really kind of never I was so young when they were poor to like right at the end of that, I just remembered all of a sudden we had a bigger house. So we went from like 5 to 9. I never heard the word no.
Mm-hmm.
And then all of a sudden they were broke again. And like my sister had medical issues and all that stuff. So then I remember that's where I kind of, when we were talking about like that moment,
Mm-hmm.
is I was old enough. I was 12, 13 years old when I kind of realized like what was happening and why. And I didn't understand finance, obviously. And my parents did a
Sure.
really good job at trying to shield us from
Mm-hmm.
understanding what was going on. But I went from knowing we were poor and not having a whole lot to all of a sudden having everything to hearing no pretty consistently. And it was very obvious because everything was cash back then,
Sure.
you know, watching my parents do less counting of money out. So, like, just through reasonable deduction, I understood we went from broke to wealthy to broke again.
Mm-hmm.
And I say broke, but honestly, that was where we kind of hit the middle class because, but I mean, you go from household income of 40 to 50,000 to a quarter of a million to back to 40, 50,000.
Right.
So like it wasn't
It feels like broke.
right. Well, and in their situation, they went from 50,000 in a double wide with one kid to 2-story, 3,500 square foot house with two kids. So they doubled their liabilities while having the same money. And the only reason they didn't re-downgrade their lifestyle um, was because of how good of a situation they bought the house in. And
Mm-hmm.
my parents still live there to this day. And so like I said, like my dad, his outlet for stress of life was creativeness,
Mm-hmm.
which is, my garage. So like if you can see this column right here behind me,
Mm-hmm.
everything from this column this way is the entire creative space that my dad had at their
Wow.
house up until about 8 years ago. And so like, like I said, it just through the passion of being my dad's best friend, learning through osmosis and stuff, that's kind of like I watched my parent like I even when my parents had money
Mm-hmm.
and they would go into a furniture store or something, right? My dad would be like, "That's ridiculous. I'm not paying for that. I'll just build it." And what was crazy as a kid, I didn't understand. Even 9, 10 years old, I'm like, "What do you mean you're gonna build that way? You gonna go cut down a tree and Paul Bunyan this shit?" Like what's going on here? And then
Mm-hmm.
like all of a sudden we're building boxes and stacking boxes up and then I realized, boom, all of a sudden we got a table, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then so like I'm like, oh okay. And then I, being the little entrepreneur I was, Dad had like all these. He was cutting up 1x5s or 1x6s, I guess traditionally.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and he would rip a clean edge down one side, knock it down to 5 inches on the other side, and then he would build his boxes for his tables to be 20, 22 inches tall for like end tables. Well, there would be these little like 5x5 cutoffs left, and I would cut them, or 5 by whatever's left, and I would cut them into little 5x5 things. And at like 10 years old, I learned how to use a router table just from watching. Had no idea how dangerous they were, but at 5 years old, I'm like, huh, Dad uses that to put, roundovers on stuff or whatever. So I just like climb up on top of the workbench at 5 years old and just,
Yeah.
and I,
What could possibly go wrong?
right. And so I built these little like 5x5 blocks with like a profile onto them.
Mm-hmm.
And then I like took some like bent nails and like hammered them into the back of the wood blocks so they were like attached to each other. And my dad was like, "What are you making there?" And I was like, "I don't know." And so like it just turned into like these little 5x5 blocks, and then eventually I started drilling little holes and using like tie wire with like 5-minute epoxy to hold the wires in place, and I started turning them into like little like tabletop picture frames. So I'd take
Oh, wow.
some little like electrical staples, right, and put them
Mhm.
diagonally in the corners to hold like a 4x6 or a 5x5 photo or whatever, right? It just, I call them, trying to keep the language clean, crap catchers on, tabletops. Um, and so like that was like my first product I ever made. And I started, so it was funny because like my parents didn't have a lot of money for childcare, obviously. So like up until I started kindergarten, there was a lot of days I'd go to work with my dad,
Mhm.
and just help him clean. Like I grew up in a body shop. And so like, mechanic by day, woodworker by night kind of thing. I learned multiple, like, dude, I actually knew what a 1/4 inch, 3/8, and half-inch ratchet was at like 6. I'm the kid getting yelled at because I grabbed the wrong size wrench. And like the flashlight memes, all that stuff, I lived every one of them. And so like I started figuring out like it was a big body shop. So I'd start making these little creations, and I'd go guilt all the office women into buying them from me. So like I'd nail like little like 1/2 inch thick pieces of wood together and make wood crosses and do anything I could come up with, right? And I'd go in the office, and my goal was to try and get enough money to buy lunch that day.
Wow.
Just as a goal for me,
Mhm.
right? Like my dad was obviously going to buy me food, but like all of a sudden one day I come to work with like this box of stuff, right? And I just go set it in the office, and I'd put like $5 on everything. It didn't matter if it was as big as the box or this big. It was $5. And I sold the entire box one day, and I had $100. I had 20 items in it. Sold the
Hundred
whole
bucks
box.
in kid money. You feel like you could take over the world.
Bro, I was like 7, 8 years old making $100 a day, right? Like, and my dad was so mad at me because, like, I go to lunch, and it was funny. I don't remember how the situation happened, other than there was a whole bunch of $5 bills,
Mhm.
and I was really cool friends with my dad's boss. He loved me, and so I go in there, and me and him were talking, and he ended up needing change for $100 bill. And he told me, he's like, "Hey, how much money you got in that little box over there, dude?" And I was like, "I don't know." So I handed it to him to count it for me because I don't know that I could count that high at 8 years old by
Mhm.
fives, right? And he was like, "You've got $100 here. Do you care if I take your fives and I give you $100 bill?" And I'm like, "Whatever." And so like we go to lunch that day, right? My dad thinks, "Oh, he made a couple of bucks. He's not paying attention to anything." And I never forget it. We were at Subway, and I'm like can't even see over the counter hardly. And dad's like, "All right, pay the lady for your food." Here we go again. I didn't even realize he was teaching me how to make a transaction, right?
Uh-huh.
So I pull this Uncle Ben out of my pocket and slap it on the counter, and dad just looks down, and he's like, "Where the hell did that come from?" And my dad said my response was, "I've been hustling." And
I love it.
and
That explains so much about you. Oh my god, that story is everything.
so well, the body shop was kind of so in Birmingham, we're in the South, so like there's old money down here.
Mhm.
And what's kind of funny is like the old money areas are ironically now the ghettos.
Mhm.
So like all the like in the, I don't even know, dude, like late 1800s,
Mhm.
early 1900s, where all the money was is now like the most rundown areas because people wanted to move in there, less than desirable people moved in there, and then
People who
property.
didn't have the money of the people that were already there, basically.
Right, but
Yeah.
then the people, the snooty people of the neighborhood were like, "Oh, where those people are getting in here now, we got to go somewhere else."
Yeah, they GTFO'd. That's what they always do.
And so all of a sudden, all those areas became very low income or low value property. So all
Mhm.
your bigger businesses, industrial parks, stuff like that started popping up because the land was cheap to buy. So
Right.
my dad's body shop was in a less than desirable area. So I'm listening to all the lingo, right? I knew what the word hustle was, didn't know what it meant. I ironically used it in the right context, but I heard all the hustle lingo, all the lingo when I was
Mhm.
little. And stuff. So that's kind of like. like we got back to like that's how I got into making, man. Like my dad built out of necessity, not out of just having to have something creative to do. So like I've always, ironically, since day one, been making money making. Like since I've been 8 years old, I've been in this game 22 years, dude. So like, and by that standard, I'm probably not performing very well. To it jokingly say I've been, creating for 22 years now, at a minimum. But like to kind of tie that into C3 and I had a childhood dream that kind of come true. About the time I was in high school, I grew up riding dirt bikes. My dad bartered with one. He fixed the dude's car and something else, and the guy didn't have enough money to pay him. And he was like, "I got this dirt bike. Like, would you be interested in that?" And my dad was like, "Yeah." So I got a dirt bike, and I loved it, man. And I was hooked.
That's freedom.
Yeah, and I was just from the moment I got home from school, dude, I would burn $10 a day in fuel out, and like in the early 2000s, like that was a lot of money in gas back then. Dude, gas was like less than $2 a gallon,
You were putting a
right?
lot of miles on that bike.
As many as possible. And so I grew up riding and got bigger and better and faster and like any kid that falls into being good at something, like the desire was to go pro. And truth be told, like my parents didn't have the finances to support a racing career, and I knew that. And I wasn't good enough to get the big corporate money as sponsoring me.
Hmm.
So like at a certain point, I kind of quit riding because like I have this disease, I call it, that if I want to do something, I want to be the best at whatever I'm doing. I try to perform at a very high level.
Hmm.
And if circumstances outside of my control hinder that to a point where like development forward and progress is like not gonna happen, I will just pivot and go do something else because like my time is not producing in that reward
Sure.
structure.
Hmm.
So I got out of riding for a little while. Decided I'd give it the old college try. Right, went to school, and I often tell people I hated college, or I hated school, but I loved college.
Hmm.
And I say that because the academic side, I hated it. I was a good student. I've had this ability to I I like underprivileged kids, and I don't want to use that word technically, but like kids who don't grow up with everything at their fingertips find ways to be resourceful
You're more
be-
resourceful. Sure.
because they don't have the resources.
Hmm.
And I've always been gifted in the ability that I'm able to retain information at a very high level. I don't know that I'd call it photographic memory, but I have great recollection
Hmm.
of if I see something and I comprehend it, I can pretty well recall 80% of it.
Yeah.
And so school was nothing for me. Tests, I could read as long as I did the assignment, I could pass the test. And my teachers hated it.
Oh,
And
my teacher. I went through the same thing, and it didn't hit me as a problem until college, because
yep,
the influx of information in college is just so high that you can't just retain it. You do have to actually learn how to study. And I went through, all the way through 12th grade, never having to study anything ever. Like as long as I heard it and read it, I understood it enough. I could pass any test. And then
so
college, and that was like a punch in the face.
so to kind of pivot off of like you said, lighting a fire under people's butts and stuff. Something I learned about what you just said. You
Hmm.
never learned how to study.
Hmm.
I want to kind of caveat that and kind of pivot off of that and tell you it wasn't that you didn't learn how to study.
Hmm.
You never learned how to learn.
Hmm.
And that dictation between those two is very specific because studying is memorizing.
Hmm.
Learning is learning. You
Right.
have to learn to be able to memorize if that makes sense. I don't know if
Well,
I can
and then
explain that.
as I've gotten older, it's funny you say that, because as I've gotten older, I realized that I'm not a book learner. I always thought I was, but I wasn't. I just had really good retention, like
Yeah.
you. What I ended up learning was, and I started watching the YouTuber Jazza, and he used the phrase one time, and it stuck in my head. It's like, oh my god, that's me. He said that he's a kinesthetic learner, and that's somebody who learns by doing. And I was
Okay.
like, "Oh my god, that's me." Like, I can't learn by reading a book, or I mean, I could get the foundational knowledge, but that's not
Right.
learning, that's having the foundational knowledge is a big difference. But what I ended up figuring out was that I just learned differently, and once I learned that I learned by doing, then now I feel like I can learn anything as long as I'm doing it.
Right.
And it's like, wow, once you learn your learning style, learning is pretty easy. We, we sit kids. I don't want to make a rant about education, but
You
we
know, I can
do.
go down that hole.
I know you and me both. I mean, my ex-wife is a teacher, so I've seen it from both ends of the system.
Yeah.
The truth of the matter is, you sit kids in rows and stuff, and you basically force them to do rote memorization and all this stuff. It's like that works for a lot of kids. It does. It always has worked for a lot of kids, but there is a certain subset of kids who it doesn't work for. And when it doesn't work for those kids get completely left behind.
And
And
absolutely.
there's no room anymore, it seems like, for new learning models, which is why the maker community is so damn good, because we don't learn that way. You know, you may watch a YouTube video for inspiration, but the learning happens when you first put hammer to nail,
Right.
you know? And I think
Well,
that's the difference now.
I think the beauty of the maker community, to piggyback off of what you were saying, is I think the education, because my current wife
Mhm.
is a teacher.
Mhm.
Um, hopefully my only wife. I don't
I
know
was
why
gonna
I
say
used the
you
word current.
I didn't wanna point that out. You said it
Yeah,
first. Good,
yeah,
good.
yeah. But she's a teacher, so I see a lot of exactly what you're talking about. That kind
Mhm.
of like parallels that, is I think where the maker community could inspire, and is honestly kind of like one of my long term goals, to get into education of life through implementation of the making process.
Mhm.
Is I don't like this whole pass or fail thing. Imagine if like people gave up on making in the making community because they didn't get a 90-degree joint, or
People
like a
do.
I know, but like
That's this right? That's the crazy part, because that's the influence of the educational system that a lot of us were brought up in, where when you don't get it right away, you feel like you've failed. No, you didn't fail. You just you took your first step, you learned what you did wrong, now take the next step and get it right the next time.
and right, and I obviously believe there needs to be like a structure to
A
that. Like,
standard, right, of
say
course.
say you get 8 tries, like one try pass or fail, that's ridiculous. Nothing in life is like that for the most
Mhm,
point. But like even with jobs, right? Like you go into a job and you're in a training exercise or whatever, like for the most part, like when you go to do something the first time, a boss is like, okay, this was good, let's improve on this. And
right.
then they give you another shot at it. This was good, let's prove on this. If you're not making measurable progress by like the seventh or eighth try, like you're probably not going to get it
Mhm,
realistically to a point where it's profitable for the company and for you,
right.
or it's beneficial. I don't know. I will profitable. I try to keep things out of a money term,
Mhm,
but a return on value.
right.
So like whether that's you're building something or you're doing a cash for transaction type of value or whatever it is, right? Like if progress is progress, but it also has to make sense.
Right.
Um,
There's progress, and then there's your worth to a company. But the thing is, people have tied their worth to a company to their worth to the world
Absolutely.
way too long. You could be absolutely worthless to your company and still have a lot of value to the rest of the world, as I've learned in the last 6 months.
Oh man, well, and that's all, like I also pivoted that into like self discovery.
Mhm.
Like people are so worried about being what they think they should be rather than figuring out who they are, and like that's my generation was the worst at this, right? Like
Mhm.
you grew up through the cliques, I grew up through the like we all did,
Mhm.
and I was like a divergence because I was like just on the edge of like the weird kids because like I saw a bigger picture down the road,
Mhm.
and but I was also on the edge of the super popular groups because I got along with everybody,
Yeah,
but because I wasn't in either group, I was interesting to both, right? Like
that was me.
and my dynamic was we either had you were popular or you weren't. There wasn't like the
Right.
97 clicks. We had, you know, 300 kids in the school. You didn't have enough to have that much diversity. Um, but like, dude, it's so discouraging because what I learned is the way I learned through life and how to navigate these channels was try this, no, try this, no, try this, no. And every time I saw regression in my life, I will also point this out. I think journaling is a massive value to life as we know it, to humanity, that is severely underappreciated. Because journaling, I started doing it when I was about 8. I had a teacher that she wanted us to keep track of like current events, like we were talking about event of the week or whatever you were mentioning to me.
Mhm.
um, but she wanted us to essentially have a roadmap of highs or lows in our life that we could learn from. And obviously 8 to 10 years old, we don't understand the value of that. But like if you're a 30-year-old and you knew from 20 to 24 your life was better than it had ever been, and you've been in a regression for 6 years, and you have literally a written record of your life, you can go back and reference good and bad decisions. And like, we're in a mindset of our attention spans are 30 to 2 minutes now, 30 seconds to 2 minutes, because we've been trained by these watching clips and Instagram reels and this, that, and the other. If you're not getting the gist of something in 60 seconds because of whatever you're watching, you swipe to the next thing.
Right.
And that's became our lifestyle. And that started 20 years ago in grade school, where we're in 50-minute classes. It takes 10 minutes for the teacher to get us settled down,
Mhm.
and then we go into a topic. You learn for 20 to 25 minutes, and then you got 10 minutes at the end of the class to start on your homework or get the
Mhm.
assignment, or as a student, try to wrap your mind around the concept of whatever you're trying to go through, to be able to ask the person who's teaching you, hey, why do I not understand this? And then maybe one or two students gets that opportunity, and then you got to go home and do the assignment that you don't understand how to do, to come back to school and be told you did it wrong. And it's like, well, yeah, I didn't get it. Why am I wrong? And then they're like,
Right.
oh, you get a bad grade, we're on to something else. So
Yeah,
like,
you're the slow kid now.
people never got an opportunity to learn. So people like me and you, who could look at something, and whether we comprehended it or not, we could recollect the
Mhm.
answer. We didn't
Mhm.
have to understand why we got the answer. We had the answer, it ended up being right.
Right.
And what that's done in a bigger scale of things is now we live in a society of she said this, he said this.
Mhm.
If I ask you why, in your day-to-day process, hey, Vincent, why'd you do that? Well, this is how I was trained to do it. Okay,
Mhm.
that I get, that's your training, but do you understand why?
Mhm.
Well, this is the safest way to do it. Why? And that's when you start challenging why in society.
Mhm.
Why do we do things this way? People tend to get angry because they can't dictate why, because they don't even know why.
They don't know why. Yeah, they've never had to think about why because why didn't matter.
So when you go back 10 people ago that were trained on why,
Mhm.
you used to get shown, this is why we do this.
Mhm.
Here's how you do it, and here's why. Now we're just shown, memorize how to do this, go do it. Rinse and
Yeah.
repeat. You don't need to know why, just get it done. And so, like, me as a kid, whether it was learning in the shop or learning at school or my parents telling me to do the dishes, right? Like, you don't need to know why. Just, this is what needs to be done. I'm not saying I'm not going to do what needs to be done. I just want to know why we do this.
Right, yeah.
Well, dishes are important because of hygiene, cleanliness, having clean dishes to eat off of. So I started learning at a very young age why was important.
Mhm.
And if I have to like dictate something to anybody in my life, if you can be the person who knows why you do what you do, you're 10 steps ahead of the person just doing it
That's your
because,
that's your competitive advantage.
right.
The understanding of why versus the understanding of this is the end result I need to hit.
Yeah. And in day to day life, like I tell people, that's the difference between a boss and a leader.
Mhm.
A leader,
A boss will tell you why, and a boss will tell you to do, and a leader will tell you why you're doing it. Yeah,
exactly.
that's boy, you speak. You're preaching
And
100%
so
to the
like
choir.
I've always, and I will say that my progress, I don't know if like on a growth setting, if you're familiar with what they call the hockey stick effect.
Mhm.
So like my progress, right, will seem super linear for a
Mhm.
long time because I'm learning why. As
Mhm.
I'm doing things, I'm trying to figure out why we do it this way. And then all of a sudden, the last 10%, it skyrockets into this amazing thing because I spent so much time figuring out why to do what I'm doing, how I'm doing it, instead of just, and I will also pivot off of that and say done is better than perfect.
Sure.
You got to have a product to refine. So it's important
Yep.
to implement the process of doing with the process of figuring out why you're doing what you're doing. You
And
still do the
sometimes
process.
those early products, and this is something that I talk about because a lot of makers that I know, a lot, not a million. I'm not like some like Anthony Robbins type guy, but a lot of makers, because they know that I've turned my making into a business, so I get a lot of questions. And one of the things I always tell people who are looking to turn making into a business is sometimes your minimal viable product is the only product you need as a market indicator,
Yeah.
because that's going to be the thing that, it may not be the perfect product, right? But you'll get for people that are interested but don't want what you're doing, you're going to get feedback. For people that aren't interested, they're just going to ignore it. You're going to get a pretty good idea. Hey, if I make this change, this will sell, or no one's interested in this at all. Because interested people, when they see a small business, will give you feedback on why they're not buying your product if they're interested in it. They
Yeah.
just will. I mean, it's just the way people are. Negative feedback is always easier to get than positive feedback.
Well, I believe that's a mindset issue, though. I don't know
Yeah.
that there's actually anything, unless somebody's just being a jerk. There's
Oh
no
yeah,
such
but I
thing as
mean, well, I
negative
mean
feedback,
negative in
so
the
to speak.
sense. I mean negative in the sense of feedback that isn't, this is the most amazing thing, I want to buy it, right? I'm just
Yeah, yeah,
negative in the sense of not I want to buy it. You
I
know.
got you. Yeah, yeah.
Um.
Like you're still getting a star because no
Yep.
stars is not an option.
Exactly. Exactly. And
Um,
then really something you were talking about is really interesting because it's something that I didn't do and I really wish I had. But you were talking about journaling
yeah,
and how important that is, and I was thinking about it. And one of the things I did accidentally, I didn't do this intentionally, just because of the way our phones are. Our phones are smarter than us, and our phones and a lot of these social media apps that we use, that while I think they may be the death of us,
yeah.
I also think there are some positive things. And
Oh,
one of the things that our
massively.
phones do is they now kick back, hey, on this day,
Yeah,
5 years ago, 7 years ago, 10 years ago, if you have your photos all
yeah.
the way back, guess what? Your phone is going to make your day really interesting because you're going to see stuff. And I have obviously a very clear delineation in my life. October 31st of 2018, I found out I had cancer.
Right.
And at that point, I was like, God, my life is so good right now. I can't believe this is happening now. Like everything's just going to fall apart. And I remember the progression all the way to March when I had my surgery. I have chemo, radiation, the whole 9 yards. And I remember thinking the whole time, like, I'm done. My life sucks. When I look at when I look at the pictures of where I thought my life was at its best, I realize it was barely good. And it's
Isn't it
like,
crazy how that happens?
and now I'm thinking, like, look, I'm not having the easiest time. I've
Right.
talked about this a lot. I mean, November I lost my job. I don't have a job. And realistically, you could say I'm a little tight financially. And then
Mhm.
that's not me trying to get sympathy for it, but that's just framing the mindset, right? But in my mind right now, I am the happiest and most at peace in the world I have ever been in my life, and nothing is perfect. Everything is up in the air. You know, all right, granted, I have a wonderful girlfriend. I have great friends. I have a supportive community watching this show that decide every week, for whatever reason, and thank you guys for doing it, but decide that this show is worthy of paying for, and really all that people are getting out of it is knowing they're supporting what I'm doing and getting the show a couple of days early. I mean, for all intents and purposes, these are the people that I owe everything to, right? But
Yeah.
all this stuff that I look at now and I go, yeah, in spite of the struggles, in spite of what I'm going through right now, this is better than what I thought was the best part of my life. And I never would have known that. Like if I was journaling this, I would have clearly known it, right? But now my phone's journaling it for me
Yeah.
through pictures. And you see a
Yeah.
picture and that little picture just triggers that memory and you go, wow, that really wasn't a great time. Like I remember everything before. I was like, oh, everything's great, and then I got cancer. Not really. Like,
Well, and what I want to point out is like to your listeners and just people, period, is it doesn't have to be like you get a spiral bound notebook. I've got an
mhm.
app. I think it's called Day One.
Oh
And
yeah,
it's
Day One is an amazing app.
and
You just
and
throw a picture in it and say, this is today's picture, and
yeah,
write a sentence, and that's your journaling for the day.
dude. Some days, like so, kind of start to finish of my day. First thing I do every morning is I speak out loud three things I'm grateful for. And then I will reach out to 3 to 5 people. I have a roulette app, or not a roulette app, a raffle app that I
Mhm.
downloaded, and I went through my phone and I put all the contacts' names into it. And so 3 to 5 people, I'll hit that app and I try to send a genuine text message to 3 to 5 people. And not, it doesn't happen every day, but
Mhm.
just like, hey, this is life telling me I need to reach out to you today.
Yeah.
Hey, hope things I've done it to you before. Hey
Yep,
man,
you
just
sure have.
I hope you're having a good day, blah 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 blah. Like if I can be of service, hit me up. And it's amazing at putting those vibes out there, at the stories that come back. Like, dude, I like you said, a lot of times I'll put a post out there, and what's weird is a lot of times I'm saying that post to me. But
Mhm.
if I feel like if it's of value to me, it's got to resonate with at least 1 to 10 other people. And
Oh,
then
yeah.
it's weird how that ripple effect happens and it just carries to other people. Like you said, you've built an entire community of people here that for whatever show up and listen to people like us ramble.
Mhm.
And like even with my own podcast, like it blows me away. I get a phone call, hey man, when are you gonna post another episode? Because
Yeah.
like when I first started my podcast, it was rapid fire. Like I did 5 in 7 days, I think, and then I was like, okay, this is too much to
Right.
do. And then like I started trying to do like I was like, all right, I'm gonna do one every other week, and then now it's kind of dwindled back to like one a month. And the reason
You
being, go ahead.
Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
And the reason I did that is like, so let me be clear about this. I've recorded probably 50 podcasts of my
Mhm.
own. But something I do is just because I feel something or just because I say something, that doesn't always mean it inherently has value.
Mhm.
And I want my podcast to mean something. And I'm seeing this trend in society where less is becoming more again,
Mhm.
where I don't want to just have a bajillion episodes of content out there to just have content. I
Right.
want that episode to be able to mean something 7 days a week, 24 hours a day, not just have a gajillion different emotions out there. Like my podcast is not my soundboard for my emotion by the minute. My
Mhm.
podcast is to genuinely put something out there that I think can help. And some days it might be a political rant, not
Mhm.
not that you've never heard one of those from me. Or some days it's putting a fire under somebody's ass, or some days it's perspective. Some days it's me just expressing gratitude. Some days it's me talking about an experience in my life, like my last podcast I did on it was literally just the speech that I didn't get to give because I was asked to speak at a public event and my time slot was 15 minutes. It turned into like I think an hour and a half podcast. I don't remember how
Mhm.
long the episode was.
You did an episode, I think it was 2 episodes ago, because I was driving home from work. Because yeah, I'm as my girlfriend Kathy says, I'm the hardest working unemployed man in the world. I was driving home from work and I was listening to it in the car, and I'd run out of podcasts, because I at least run out of the ones I had queued to listen to in the car. And I opened up the podcast app while I was on the highway, and I saw your show, and I'm like, "Oh, thank God, that'll get me through to home now." And I put it on, and I'm listening, and you were talking about something that means everything to me. You were talking about gratitude.
Yeah.
You mentioned it, and you mentioned it was one of your favorite Bible verses, and I was like, it was Philippians. That's what it is, right?
If I have to say it off the top of my head, I'll be lying. I've
Well,
got
it's in the modern English translation. The verse is, "Be anxious for nothing, be grateful for all things."
right.
And when you said that, I'm actually getting goosebumps right now, because that's my thing, right? And I actually have that on
Yeah,
my
you sent me a picture of
I
it.
sent you a picture of the mirror. And
Yeah,
I remember thinking, like, in that moment, I was kind of like, "Oh man, it's just everything is so hard right now." And it's weird because I see that mirror every day, but you know how you become blind to the things you see every day? Like your neighbor has the same car in their driveway every day and you don't notice it. And then the one day they get a new car and all of a sudden you're like, when did they get a new car? You
yep.
know, it's the same thing with that Bible verse. Like I have it on a mirror right by the door of my bedroom so that I have to see it every day when I walk out of my bedroom. I wake up, it's the first thing I see. It says, "Be anxious for nothing, be grateful for all things."
Yeah.
And when you
So
said it that day, it hit me like, damn, I have to remember this. Like I have to internalize this again. Like it's become such a thing for me that I don't think about it anymore,
yeah.
but I need to stop letting it just be a thing in my life and start actually remembering it.
So Andy Frisella has this saying, and I'm going to try and remember it off the top of my head. It's the formula for happiness. It's gratitude plus purpose plus gratitude, gratitude plus purpose plus something equals happiness.
Mhm.
What is it? It's like intention. Um, anyways, but it all has to do with the age old thing of like the harder you work, the luckier you get. Uh, it's like intent. I think it's
Mhm.
gratitude plus purpose plus intent, and it equals happiness.
Gratitude, purpose, and discipline.
Discipline, yeah, and so uh, doing those things like it's the recipe for happiness, and like it's like I mentioned, I had a dream job. I grew up racing and I wanted to go pro. I wasn't good enough. But what I did is when I was sitting in my freshman English class, technically sophomore, but I left right on the edge of that freshman sophomore credit hour thing.
Mhm.
And so I was sitting in English class and my teacher says, write a paper on life experience. This is your final. Dude, I'm 18 years old. What life experience? What do you mean? What do you want to know? The girl I took to prom, Friday Night Lights, like how I lost my virginity? Like what are we talking about here? Like I that's literally what I said. And
Mhm.
she was like anything that you would contribute to the experience of your life, write about it. And like it was in that moment that I realized my life wasn't to sit there and write about experience, it was to go get it.
Yeah.
I got up out of class in that moment. I walked out of class. I called my mom. I said, I'm coming home. I
Mhm.
said, I'll get a job because the deal was if I wasn't at school, I was going to have a job.
Mhm.
And I was like, yep, that's fine. I'll go look for stuff Monday. And I literally packed my car as full of everything that I could and I drove home. And I got my dad's pickup truck the next night. I drove up to college. Me and my buddies loaded up the truck, brought everything home. I went and found a job Monday morning. And one of my friends that I grew up racing with calls me and he's like, yo, I heard you're back in town. Like, we're going riding this weekend. Do you want to go? And I was like, yeah. So I went riding with him and got bit by the bug again. And it was in that moment that I found purpose. I
Mhm.
didn't know what, I didn't know how, I didn't know why. I was going to do something to learn how to live in that world. And so I put foot to ass, sorry,
No,
um,
that's fine.
and did whatever I had to do. I drove all over this country working amateur events until I finally got a phone call from the director of Supercross to go on the road and tour the country building Supercross events. And that I wasn't good enough to race at the professional level, but I climbed the scales of the amateur world to where I could work at the professional level and I was still in the environment I loved.
Mhm.
Well, I learned very quickly people like me don't prosper in corporate environments. Um,
No. You don't say.
well, I learned that in the corporate world, squeaky wheels don't get greased; they get replaced.
Mhm.
And so after I had earned tenure, or I was a veteran in the world in the industry after 3 years, um, they asked me what I thought about a couple of things, and I made the mistake of telling them what I thought, and we had what I will call creative differences and went separate ways. And I saw this coming because they straight up told me they weren't going to renew my contract.
Mhm.
And so this was kind of where C3 started.
Mhm.
I came home and I had decided like I was fascinated by CNC machines. And over the period of while I was gone, when I would come home, I'd be on the road for 6 months. I'd come home for 6 months. And what we didn't get into is I'm a master licensed plumber, and my now father-in-law owns an electrical company. So when I would come home, I would help him with his electrical business. And that happened through, he was like, I know you don't know none about electrical, but running pipe is running pipe.
Mhm.
So if you want to come help me, you got a job.
It's got if it's conduit for wire or water, it's pipe.
Yeah, pipe is pipe. And so now I had a way to progress financially.
Mhm.
Well, like I said, I've always been making, I've always been building stuff in the shop with my dad. And as Pinterest and Etsy and Instagram and all these things started catching traffic, people were asking us to do more and more and more and more. And a lot of the stuff was like the wall hangers and like, dude, can you imagine not having a laser to cut the little intricate things that you cut
Yeah, I can't.
and
Not at all.
doing that by hand and then trying to charge a appropriate price per hour value? Yeah, imagine trying to do that with a daggum. That would take you an hour and a half to cut out with a scroll saw or
Minimum.
like a handheld coping saw,
Mhm.
right? So an hour and a half of your time, that's $100 trinket you just held up,
Yeah.
right? Or
Yeah.
whatever you value your
Yeah.
time at. But with a laser, it's in my laser, it's less than a minute.
Yeah.
So, you know, I was like, okay, well, obviously, for where the market's at, I'm going to have to heavily invest in automation to get to a profitability to be able to make the things that cater to my market.
Mhm.
And that was where I saw the potential. So I was like, I started looking into CNC machines, this, that, and the other. And I was like, if I can't go balls to the wall in on this, like, it's not like, yeah, I'll keep making trinkety type stuff, but like, I saw the potential for money.
Mhm.
My passion was already there. I did it anyway. And I was like, all right, well, I'm going to have something to pivot off of when I come off the road. So that whole year, I taught myself how to do 3D modeling. I taught myself CAD and CAM. I taught myself everything on how to operate CNC machines, both additive and subtractive manufacturing.
Mhm.
And with CNCs being subtractive, the cheapest actual barrier to entry with CNC machines was with 3D printers. So I bought an Ender 3 and I taught myself how to do additive manufacturing. And I was like, if I can teach myself how to make this 3D printer work, a CNC machine, same thing, just in reverse.
Mhm.
And so I think it was like $300. I bought a 3D printer and nailed it, figured it out. I was like, I'm the king of the world. And I had $1,500 sitting in my savings account and I bought a Shapeoko. And that was my first CNC machine. I bought the little one, the 18 by 18.
Mhm.
And immediately, right? I bought it. I was making coasters and little like valet boxes and eat everyday carry type trays and just trinkety type stuff.
Mhm.
What I call fair type products. And then people were like, "Hey man, can you do door hangers?" Well, I think the actual space on the 3 is 16 by 16 or
Yeah,
8.
it's about it's 2 inches shorter. So yeah, 16 by 16.
Yeah, so I couldn't do an 18-inch circle.
Mhm.
So I would hand cut 18-inch circles with a router jig, right?
Mhm.
And then I would put it in the CNC machine and I would do an 18-inch circle, but my engravable space was 16 inches. And
Yep.
so, like, you'd have a 1-inch barrier, which looked appropriate. Immediately, I was like, okay, I'm going to have to get the XXL.
Mhm.
And so I made enough money on the little one to buy the upgrade package. And I talked to my dad and I was like, look, dude, like, it's always been me and you in the shop hanging out. And we'd always kind of talked about the dream for both of us would be I could pivot into a business and like or get to a point in life where like I could just get paid to hang out with my dad.
Mhm.
Like that's for me that would be it. Like if that happened, like whatever ends meet was, like I would never have to grow again. I would be the most fulfilled ever. My dad's my best friend. And so C3 was born out of the drive of getting my dad out of the factory environment and retiring him out of that. And so C3, my name is Chance Cromwell Canary. My dad's is Craig Cromwell Canary. The firstborn son, as far as we can trace back, the middle name's been Cromwell, and the first son has always had the initial CCC. So that's
Okay.
where C3 came from.
Gotcha.
And eventually what it'll take on is, Lord willing, I have a child or a son. His name will be Carter Cromwell Canary. So it'll be Craig, Chance, Carter, and then hopefully that trilogy will always carry C3, 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 down the line to some point. And the whole purpose of my business is like if I had to like a core value of mine is like just to make the coolest stuff with the greatest people and write a hell of a story while we're doing it. Like, and then to piggyback that, I tell people I want to be the Versace of woodworking. Um, and people think it's crazy, but like dude, 5 years into the game, like I've got billionaires for clients and I'm involved with the making community, or I won't even say the making community, but like my business is actually involved in massive cultural movements. Like
Mhm.
I'm essentially the creative director for Una Vida Tequila, which is a pivot off of, Andy Frisella is the money behind that. So I got tied in with First Form, and then all of those people are super close knit community. So once I was in with them, I was their guy. So
Mhm.
when those people talk, hey, who's doing the da 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 da, all of a sudden I start getting phone calls from all these people, and then
Hey,
business.
we're here. You're the guy that does this. Can you do it for us?
Yeah, and so that's kind of how I got into where C3 is today. But the whole background and the whole push of C3 and everything that I do is I wouldn't be here without my dad. C3 was born out of me being my dad being my best friend and me just trying to be his helper. And through osmosis, learning how to create along the way, my dad gave me all the skills. I just turned them into a product. And, I taught myself how to run a laser, a CNC, or whatever, because I don't have 10 people to run
Mhm.
a shop with. I had to buy machines to, you know,
Those are your machines are your employees. Kind of the same way my friend Ben told me when I was looking, I needed a CNC. I figured out like I got to get a CNC at some point because laser isn't going to do everything. And
right.
I was looking at the Shaper Origin, and
Yeah.
he said Shaper Origin's not the right machine for you. I said, "What do you mean?" He goes, "You're the only guy in your shop. You can't leave a Shaper Origin
Nope.
semi unattended while it goes."
Yep.
He goes, "You need to think of it like you're hiring your first employee." And I did, and I got the Shapeoko Double XL, and
Yep.
I was very glad that I did. I was like, that was the best. I think that was the best advice I've ever gotten since I started making, as far as business advice. It was, treat your machines like employees. You're hiring employees. You're not buying a machine for a task. You're buying the best employee you can afford to pay, and by pay it means buy.
Right.
So, I got
Eh,
my Glowforge, I got my CNC, and I got decent tools. And you
My
know what?
best, yeah.
I've never had to replace a tool because I listened when people told me like, "Hey, these are employees." It's like, "Okay, good
You
call."
know, that's well, and that's an investment in and of itself, right? Like,
Mhm.
and you bought quality I will caveat, and I don't know if you've got a relationship with Glowforge, but
I do not.
I will say that like I heavily looked into the Glowforge products
Mhm.
because I'm so glad I didn't go down that route.
Oh, I totally understand. It's not for everybody. It's
See,
definitely not for everybody.
well, I mean, for even like the barrier to entry to Glowforge, it's super expensive
It
compared
is
to
super expensive.
comparative models on the market. I think
But
your Glowforge probably costs more than my OhmTech laser.
I guarantee you it did, but I'm gonna tell you the one thing that Glowforge had going for it. They had a guy, me, who was not confident that he could ever learn how to do a lot of this stuff. Like I was fine with woodworking. Woodworking's fine. I'm good. I was okay with the Cricut. I was great with 3D printing. I
Right.
never thought I could learn how to work a laser. And now working a laser is not a big deal to me because I got the training wheels version first. So for me,
I could see that. Yeah.
I think that's where I don't know that you could evolve a whole business ongoing with a Glowforge. I don't know that that's possible. I'm already feeling like I've outgrown it a little bit, but in a lot of ways, there are things it does where I go, "Man, that's nice." Like I don't
Yeah.
have to think about it. It's
Yeah.
basically it's an appliance. It's a
Their
I,
QR
that's
their QR code technology with their products is
and that's great.
amazing.
That's great. But even just the fact that it's perpetually getting updated. And it has not gotten worse since it's gotten way better. In fact, when I got it, I used to have to make jigs for everything.
Yeah.
Now using the camera on board, I could probably engrave a dime accurately centered
Oh, that's
from
cool.
with the camera.
Yeah,
Like
see, I make jigs for everything.
and there's nothing wrong with making jigs, right? Making jigs are
Right.
definitely a thing, and I used to do it too, and that but the idea that I don't have to think about that, like, yeah, I could, and if I wanted to do repetitive tasks, I'd probably make a jig so I didn't have to refocus and readjust the camera every time, right? But the fact that it's gotten better over time since I got it, I understand why people wouldn't want it, but I also there are a lot of upsides to it. It's not the perfect machine. It's a very good machine. It's probably the best starter machine. I would tell people to start with that over an X tool like diode laser.
Oh, absolutely.
Those
If
open
they have the
frame
budget.
yeah, those
Yeah.
open frame diode lasers, most of them are awful. I'm sorry, I
So
don't care how good you say they are. They're awful. Yeah.
so I my first laser was actually I bought a JTech
Ah,
7 watt.
your Shapeoko.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And it did enough to pique the interest where I saw the marketability.
Yes.
and then I bought a K40.
Mhm.
Um,
God
and
help you.
that would oh well, I immediately upgraded it. I put an upgraded power supply, laser tube, driver. I rebuilt the whole thing. It
It's
is
so
the
funny because everybody buys those machines and they're like, "These are good machines." Like, no, they can be good machines.
yeah.
They're not
Well,
good machines out of the box. None of them are.
see, for people getting into lasers now, like Ohmtech just dropped that their new Glowforge. It's kind of
Uh-huh.
like the between the Glowforge and the K40, their
Yes.
Polar or whatever it is.
Yeah, the Polar.
And I have more money in my K40 than the Polar.
Yeah.
And for the product, but I'm talking 5 years ago,
Right.
right? So I bought a K40 and figured out how to do. Sorry, your program just popped something up.
Huh.
I bought a K40 and I learned how to do like metal engraving, stuff like that with different
Sure.
solutions and some of the stuff we've talked about where I told you about the patina dyes and things like that.
Mhm.
And dude, that landed me a contract that probably pays me 15 grand a year off
Yeah,
of my K40.
he's the one for everybody that's, watching. If you remember when I made the Hellraiser set, the earrings and the pendant, the engraved brass. Remember I was talking about a friend of mine that told me to use brass black on it? Chance is the friend of mine that told me to use brass black, and I'll tell you what, I always have that in my like, near my metal stuff now
Yeah,
because I realize, like, "Oh, this stuff is fantastic." Like,
dude, it's
it
incredible.
it's instantaneous, like, the
Yeah.
feedback is immediate, you don't have to let it sit. Like, I love the verdigris on copper, and, you get that with salt and vinegar, and you let it
Uh
sit for 24 hours to get that color. But, man, this ain't that. This is like, dip it in,
huh.
pull it out, wave it in the air to dry, and by the time it's dry, it's black.
And you just wipe it off. Cleanup
Yeah.
is there is no cleanup. It's just
It's it was fantastic. It was one of the best recommendations I've gotten on something. I use it and I started realizing, like, everyone uses this stuff too. Like, it's like you
yep.
see the bottle, like, I watch jewelry
It's
makers on
it's one
YouTube.
of the best kept secrets,
Yeah.
I
You
think. Like
you
you
watch
don't know what it is until you know what it is, and then you're like, ah.
you recognize the bottle. I was recognizing the bottle in, on other people's jewelry bench. I
yeah.
was like, "That brass black, I know. I see you. I see you."
So I figured that out when I started. Like, dude, I went through this run where like custom dog tags, like for
Mhm.
actual dogs, was
Mhm.
just insane.
Yeah.
And so I had a diamond drag bit for my Shapeoko,
Mhm.
and everybody wanted the letters black,
Mhm.
and trying to do that with paint was impossible.
Yeah, you
Even
could
like rub and buff, you couldn't get a really good thing.
no.
And then I discovered brass black
Yep, put it
and
on and then steel wool the top of it off and it sits in there.
immaculate,
Yep.
immaculate,
I've done some
and
really cool stuff with it since you recommended it to me.
and uh and stuff. So like, dude, it was just it's stuff like that where I was able to kind of, here we go again, thanks to my life and my experience of life, like learning how to be resourceful because I didn't
Mhm,
have resources is like it's probably my biggest strength. Learning how to, I joke with people about anything I buy in life is a multi-purpose tool.
mhm,
A pair of pliers is also a hammer. Um, and so like, I mean, even with my laser, my CNC, whatever it is, like I've learned how to do so many different things just because, like you said, it's our first employee.
mhm.
So like, with if I could figure out how to make my CNC sweep my shop, I would. Um,
Yeah,
eh,
I think that's something that I feel like that's something that you learn very quickly when you're the only person in there, is that nothing can have one function.
no,
And if it does have one function, it probably doesn't have a proper space. Like, I learned it the hard way because in my old shop was not it was about the same size as my new one, but my old shop was a rectangle.
yeah,
I had a lot of wall space. I had a lot of outlets. My new shop is basically a square.
yeah.
I don't have as much wall space. I have nowhere near as many outlets.
That's why that
A-
column got put in.
so you can run wires.
So I had a shop vac hose. I
Hmm.
didn't have really good. This is a car garage,
Right.
in my house. So like I didn't have dust collection in here.
Right.
So I was using my miter saw, which used to sit right here, and I
Hmm.
stepped back and I had a shop vac hose that was ran, and I tripped.
Mm.
And I just fell over and at the same time got tangled up in an airline and an extension cord. And I was like, you know what? No more cords, no more hoses.
Yeah.
So there's actually a pipe that comes down the center of that column. And
Hmm.
at the bottom, it kicks out. It's got a PVC fitting that I can turn on dust collection,
Perfect.
and I've got a central location. It's got power on it and it's got dust collection, and then my airline is on a reel. So
Mhm.
like it can reach anywhere, and as soon as I'm done, I pull it, let it go, and it goes back into its
Yep.
place.
I learned the importance very quickly, like, even smaller hand tools that I had that were power tools that were on cords.
Yep.
The only corded tool I have left in my shop that isn't a stationary tool is my heat gun, and that's because a battery operated heat gun is retarded. Like, that just doesn't work.
Dude, the
But
DeWalt one works pretty well.
I had the Ryobi one, it was great, but it was the 4 watt-hour batteries, it was just
Oh
killing
yeah.
them. It just kills them.
So
It did, like, you can run it for 5 minutes tops.
so the coolest thing that I've done, just as a caveat, this is the remote to my dust collection.
Oh, yeah. I've seen all you guys with your high-end dust collection. You all have
Dude,
your
this is
remotes.
$20.
It's great.
It's got a 3 mile radius on it. It's crazy. And it's surprised. I was like, there's no way that's gonna work. But for $20, I'm not gonna not do it.
Yeah, you give it a shot for 20 bucks.
Yeah. And stuff. So like just to I know we're trying to wrap into the end of your
Mhm,
stuff. Um Man, C3 Customs for me is just it's a way to creatively express myself. I believe everybody should have a few different hobbies, something to keep you in shape, something to challenge you mentally, and something to stimulate you creatively. Um, for some people, physical contact with people is their physical hobby. Um,
I
Go ahead.
learned that I learned that when I started dating in March of last year, and I added it to my dating profile very quickly. I was like, "I don't care what your outlet is, but
Yeah,
you have to have some kind of outlet, hobby, or creative pursuit, or we're not gonna be compatible. I don't care if we don't do the same thing, but I want you to be passionate about something."
yeah.
And I think that's a super important thing for people. Like, if you're not passionate about anything that you want to, not that you're watching, read, I'm not talking about books and TV and movies. And I'm talking about if you're not passionate about a thing you do, then you and I are probably not going to click. And
Well,
that's a very big deal to me. And
and
it's
to, well,
proven accurate.
yeah. Well, to piggyback off that, like even with me and my wife, like we didn't even get engaged until like we had a set of rules we had talked about, and I was like, all right, well, here's the deal. Like we'd kind of decided we were kind of going on the same path, and this is what we both wanted was to be with each other for the rest of our lives. And I was like, all right. And my thing is like you're gonna be graduated or have a career for yourself,
Hmm.
and I need you to be root. I needed her to be somebody for her before I
Hmm.
asked her to be somebody for me.
Right.
And like, dude, I mean, we've been married. November will be a year, so we've been married for 6 months now, but we've been together for 10 years, and like that's where things are kind of shifting,
Hmm.
of where, like you said, I've made it important to her for her to have her own hobbies and outlets and creative, whether it's reading or whatever,
Hmm.
you have to have something that stimulates you,
Yeah.
and because like you if you're this whole concept of society of like once you're married, like you're one.
Yeah.
Like you can't be everything to each other.
That
You
doesn't
have to
work.
be independently happy. You have to be independently sustained.
Hmm.
Your spouse or partner, or whatever you want to call it, can contribute to all of these things. But you should independently be your own person and happy in yourself. But that's where your spouse picks up the slack, right? Like if you're upset today and you're not
Hmm.
independently happy, your girlfriend can come in and supply that happiness.
Right.
But it's unfair to her to have to do that every day.
Of course.
Because
Of
then
course.
if she's always having to supply happiness to you, you can't supply it back to her.
And she can't, and not only that, but she can't fill from a cup that's empty.
Right.
She can't pursue her own happiness if she's putting all her energy into building up mine. So
Yeah, for sure.
I have to keep my shit together so that she can make her shit happy.
Right.
I think that's the important thing. I think that's the important thing in relationships. I think that's I learned it too late. I learned it too late, but I learned it. So I guess in the
As long
end,
as as long
doesn't
as you
matter
learned
when,
it,
right?
man.
Yeah.
Well, progress was progress. I think it was either Einstein or Benjamin Franklin said if you judge a fish by its ability to climb a tree, it'll
It's a
spend its
terrible
entire
fish.
life to be a failure. You know. Um, but
we
yeah,
should
man.
we should pivot into things a week. I mean, I can't believe I just looked at the program timer. We've been going an hour 20 already.
So,
which is
well, it shows fit. So, like my mind, I was like, oh, he said around 55-ish minutes. We'll
yeah.
pivot into the other stuff. I forgot we had a whole 20 minutes before this.
So let's I know I feel like I probably didn't explain it well enough to you, but I know on the fly you could come up with a pretty good thing of the week, something that caught your attention, something you want to tell people about. Think show and tell, but I'm pretty sure you have something to share. So why don't you go first, or I'll go first because I can talk about mine for a while. I'll give you a chance to think of yours if you want to do that.
Go ahead, man. I've
Okay.
done a lot of talking.
So if you've done any kind of craft work or YouTube watching lately, or you especially in the artist community, you've probably seen a website called Temu, Temu. And out of nowhere, and I mean literally out of nowhere, this site just appeared everywhere and suddenly everybody was buying from it. Think wish.com, but not shady. And actually, when you order stuff, it actually gets to you. It's kind of wild. I've been using it. So, one of the things I've been using it for, actually, I've been buying a lot of silicone molds because I've been doing a lot of stuff with resin and this other product that I talked about with Steve McDonald called Resin Crete, which is some magical stuff. If you never worked, in fact, this is a piece I made for Kathy. It looks like ceramic, like plaster
What?
rather, but I painted. Obviously, I hand painted it because, as I keep saying on the show, hand painting has become my obsession since I used to suck at it, and now I'm getting very good at it. Um, the site is magical. They have stuff on there, and I'll show you. Actually, I have a really funny one. Um, this is anime monster stickers. Okay. Like you have to have a $10 order minimum. So sometimes you find yourself buying $1 things. And I was like, what the hell are they? Anime monsters. They look familiar.
Oh,
Squirtle and
that's
Charmander.
that's dope.
Yeah, so obviously they're not legit, but the like the silicone molds, I bought a lot of weird art supplies. It's like, oh, I don't want to spend, $25 for that, but I'll spend $3 for that, sure. And turns out the site's a lot of fun to just browse, and like you find yourself just going, it's $2. I'll add it to the cart, add it to the cart, add it to the cart. And I think I probably spent more money than I need to there, but I've gotten some really cool molds and some really cool stuff there. And it doesn't seem to be scammy because I've literally gotten everything I've ordered, unlike Wish, where you don't basically get anything you order. So definitely check it out. Their app is kind of crappy, but it's functional, and that's all it needs to be. It's Temu. You can find it App Store, Google Play Store. I think they have a website, but you can always get it on their app. It's fun. It's fun. It's fun to be able to just go there and go, I need a resin mold. What I need some ideas. What do they have? And just buy a mold, and then all of a sudden you have an idea what to do with it. So
So is that
cool
P to
site.
P? Is that like
Uh
person to person?
it's so they are a marketplace, and they do have first party fulfillment also. So it's both. So
Interesting. I'll
it's
definitely
a
have to.
I don't know
I'm
what
gonna be
they're
honest. I haven't seen it, so I'm gonna
it's
definitely dive into it.
it's kind of fun. Like if you're into craft supplies, art supplies, they have other stuff too. But I mean, that's the stuff. They have tools. I don't know that I would buy any of the tools on there. They're from crazy Chinese manufacturers. I can only imagine it would probably be fun to buy the stuff just to see what it does. If you have throwaway money, it'd probably
What's
be
that?
fun. Exactly. No, believe me, I understand. Which is why I'm only buying resin molds from them. But I bought a lot of resin. In fact, I had to stop buying resin molds from them because I have a whole box of them now. So
That's a good problem to have.
it's a very good problem to have, especially when you're trying to break into doing something new with your business. Ooh, was that a
Not,
hint?
not that I don't have that on my heart.
So that's my thing of the week. All right, Chance. I gave you as much time as I could, my friend. What do you
Nah,
got?
man. So, this is where I'm gonna kind of jump into that light of fire under your butt.
Okay.
Something that's been on my heart a lot,
Uh-huh.
especially today. I did a post about it. I'm gonna plug myself. My business page is at C3 Customs.
Mm-hmm.
And then my personal page is at Chance Canary.
Mm-hmm.
And I do have two, like Vincent mentioned, Chance.Canary or Chance Canary. They're both mine. But something that I've been posting a lot about is like self worth.
Mm-hmm.
And people don't understand the importance of standing up for whether you perceive it or not, your worth. And the saying is, you stand up for what you're worth or someone will always pay you less. And people directly tie that to like a dollar value of something, but
Mm-hmm.
it doesn't matter if they're paying you respect, love, attention, or literally a cash transaction. If you don't stand for what you're worth, someone's always going to pay you less. If all of a sudden Vincent's like, I'm working for $40 an hour because I've supplied this, and this value to the table. If you don't stand up for that, someone's going to always be like, man, we could pay you 20. And you're going to go, no, you're not. And,
Mhm.
so and what that actually caveats into is it's not actually necessarily about standing up as much as it is about bringing the conversation of why you might not feel you're getting the reciprocity of what you're bringing to the table,
Mhm.
where your desired result could be one conversation away. So like if you're not getting the attention or whatever you need out of your spouse, a friend, a family member, a boss, a relationship, a transactional relationship with business, like if you know you're putting yourself behind the eight ball because it might be easier, or I don't want to stir up any trouble, or I don't want to hurt anybody's feelings. Well, typically if you feel the way that I'm describing, the people on the other side of that aren't worried about how you feel. So
I was just going to say that, and I'm going to give you a very good example. And I'm not going to name names and I'm not going to name people. I'm just going to say this will happen to you if you don't listen to this man because he knows what he's talking about. If you get into a relationship with someone and there is a big imbalance in the feelings that you have toward that person, and those feelings aren't mutual, and you can't explain to that person why they should feel the same way about you, that you're going to have a lot of relationship problems. I learned this. All right, well, I said I wasn't going to name names, but I learned this in November with someone who I thought was the next one.
yeah.
And I ended up figuring out that I was so obsessed with, I can't believe that she's into me, that it ended up being like I was worthless to her. And I actually probably got her to believe more than anything else that she was better than I was because I believed it. And I believed I wasn't worthy because I didn't see my own self worth. And that's a
I've
really bad thing to do.
I've been a massive proponent to you of, especially like when you make posts or like I follow your stories and stuff, like we follow each other kind of loosely sometimes, and
Hmm.
sometimes we're very engaged with each other.
Hmm.
But like, dude, I will put myself up there on that side of things and tell everybody that like I'll be the first person to come to bat for you, dude, where I'm like, dude, no, like you don't understand the influence that you do bring, like just your story. And another shameless plug, when one day I bring you on my podcast,
Hmm.
it being called Chances, the idea of my podcast is people that took chances in their life or have learned through adversity and took
Hmm.
opportunity and went to the next level. um is you have to you have to understand your worth, your value,
Yeah,
your experience. Everybody's so worried about being validated, especially with this blue check mark movement, right? Now
sure.
that you can buy it, like, are they valid? What you don't understand is like no one can take away the opportunity of what you've existed in.
Right.
Like they can take away your entire life. That doesn't change the circumstance of what you already been through.
Hmm.
So the concept, everybody's like, oh, I got to start from scratch. No, you're starting from experience, and that experience, you in your last relationship, you learned
Hmm.
XYZ. This is what I need to do. You went into this relationship and now you're happier than you've ever been
I
because
literally am happier than I've ever been. And
we had
because I
this
learned,
conversation the other night.
yeah, yeah.
And so people, need to understand that, like, if you're not whatever, maybe you're not, your spouse isn't performing in the bedroom, or you're not performing in the bedroom. Hey, let's try this. Let's do this. Like, it's a taboo topic. Nobody wants to have that conversation. What you need to understand, it's not about ego or feelings. Like, you're making that an emotional situation. At
Yep.
the end of the day, it's ones and zeros. And so, like, if you're not happy with the situation, but you refuse to say something about why you feel the way you feel, that's your fault.
Yep.
And
Yep.
you're allowing somebody else to control your life because you're afraid to offend them. Like I said, they're not worried about how you feel, which is why you feel the way
Exactly.
you feel. So
Exactly.
just they're putting their priorities up here while you're down here. Just put yours back up to next to theirs.
Just
And
next
if,
to them. You don't have to put them above them.
yeah,
That's the
well,
crazy thing. You don't have to put them above someone, but all you have to do is find parity. And once you find parity, you're going to find your relationships balance a whole lot better.
and that's that, dude. That's honestly where I'm at in life right now, especially today. Is we're in this big equitable movement in
Hmm.
life, where everything in life has to be about equality and equity and blah 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 blah. And the truth of the matter is it when you break it down to ones and zeros, it's not that at all. It's people are trying to act like it's about equality when it's
Mhm.
really about superiority. And once you point that out, they immediately start retracting because they either get offensive or they'll retract and go, "Oh, wow, I didn't even really realize that I was trying to become superior." You know, and that's we got to stop doing that. But you also got to stand up for what you're worth. And if what you are truly worth, the value you bring to the table in whatever situation in life is superior, it is what it is. It's just a
Yeah.
fact. And
And
and that's where that, kind of wraps out of where I'm at this week cuz like, back to the Bible verse and everything else, like you got to be grateful for what you have
mhm.
in order for life. My case, I believe in God. I believe you're giving certain things in life, and if you don't appreciate those things, you're never able to see past those things to appreciate other things. And life is also not going to give you more because you don't already appreciate what you have.
Right.
So you can't live in abundance if you're living in a less than life.
I think that's pretty good place to I think that's a pretty good exclamation point to put
Yeah.
on that. That's perfect. That's perfect. You know who lives in abundance though? The people who support this show financially. and
Amen.
and those people include Matthew Serio from Artigiano Serio, Big Al Schultz of New York Woodworks, Tori Decker from Tori Did It, Ed Swanson of Ed's Clocks and More, Jake Drews of Make with Jake, Megan Chris from Onyx Designs Woodworks, Christian Neary of Warrenworks, Jeff Stein, aka A Weird Guy, Kim and Garrett from Kim and Garrett Make It, Rory Langefeld of RLL Woodworks and DIY, Robert J. Keller, Rebecca Cole of Bexy Designs, Brian Arsenault, the Seven Hills Maker, Lars Coleman of Colorado Multicraft, Dave Bauer of Dave Bauer Art, Nick Birchtold of Birchtold Design Build, Jeremy Spees, Mike of Pixels to Prototype, Donald LeBlanc of Fun with Woodworking, Grant Alexander from the Clamp Podcast, Brad Harrison of Brad's Customs, and Billy Polton of Polton Projects. Thank you so much to everyone that supports this show financially. It is tremendously appreciated. And just as a little side note, I am wearing our very stylish, digitally creative t-shirts. If you didn't get your order in by the time you're hearing this, you're probably going to be in the next wave, but that doesn't mean they're not available. You can still order them. I'm just doing the first run of them 3 days before you hear this episode. But I did warn you in my Instagram stories, so sorry if you missed it. But they are still going to be available. We'll just do batch orders to keep the shipping prices sane. So thank you for the people that ordered. Thank you for the people that support the show. If you can't support the show financially, hey, that's fine too. A review, share the show, suggest a guest. I've gotten some really good guest suggestions that I'm going to look into and see if I can maybe make some of them happen because you know what? Guests make the show go round, and that's why I do this, so I can talk to cool people like my good friend Chance, who this is actually the first time we've ever actually spoken to each other, which is
Yeah,
kind
dude.
of crazy.
We've been chatting in DMs for what, 3
Years,
years now?
three,
Three,
about three
three,
years.
maybe 4 years. Yeah, 3 or 4 years. It's
I,
been a
I
while.
I've been trying to think. I've been trying to think, and I usually I can remember, but for some reason I can't remember how we found each other. I know we just found each other on Instagram, but usually you find someone through someone. I just don't remember how we connected. But I'll be honest with you, buddy. I really am glad. And the other day, and I'm just going to tell you this, and have a little bit of a soppy emotional moment. But the other day when you said you always pray for me, man, I gotta tell you, there are days when I'm like, man, he must be praying extra hard for me because I can't get this shit done myself. So I
Always, man.
appreciate it. I appreciate it. Everything you said to me, every fire you've lit under my ass over the past 3 years, I appreciate all of it. And I tremendously appreciate your friendship, just so you know.
You're a genuine light in my life, brother.
Thank you, man. That's what I try to be. I don't always succeed, but I always try. I
Eh,
always tell Kathy that. I said I may not be the best boyfriend ever, but just know that I'm always trying to be the best boyfriend ever, and that's all I can do.
can I
Um,
can I say one more thing real quick to peg
of
it off of
course.
what you just said? I want to tell people that especially in today's society, like we always hear you show up, you give 110%.
Hmm.
Don't be ashamed if people don't understand what your 100% is day to day.
Hmm.
Like some people, it takes 100% of whatever they have to give that day just to get out of bed and put their feet on the floor. I know I've been there. I know you've been there.
Hmm.
Just to get up and exist, to not just sleep the day away. And like, I cannot tell people how much of a win that is. And you might be made fun of if you point that out, like even if like I'm a big person of like don't post every 5 minutes on social to eating a sandwich, using the bathroom, don't do that. But like if you put yourself out there on social, whatever your channels are, and you're like, really battling some demons today. It took everything I could to get out of get out of bed. If you guys could just keep me in your thoughts today or say a prayer for me, anything's appreciated. You would be
Mhm.
surprised at how many people are like, just out of nothing else than knowing they weren't alone to
Yeah.
experience that day.
Yeah.
It makes it's a total different game changer, which I always try and spin back into gratitude of
Mhm.
be grateful. Like I wake up in immense gratitude because like nothing's promised. Like tomorrow's not promised.
Yep.
And so like when I wake up, first things I do is I try to be very vocal about. I don't do it every day. Uh, Life happens, but I
Mhm.
try to. The first thing out of my mind is or out of my mouth typically is gratitude, because that programs me for the day and it gives me a better shot at beating those demons just to get out of bed. So
Absolutely.
if I had to say, one more thing, that don't be ashamed if it takes everything just to get up and exist. You don't have to
Getting
win
up.
every day.
Yep. Yep. And if everybody says try, well, sometimes trying is, hey, I'm going to try to make something out of today.
Yeah.
That's fine. You tried. You
Yeah.
know what? And it didn't work. Maybe even if it didn't work today, guess what? Get another chance at it tomorrow. Get
Got
another
to take some
chance.
chances though.
Multiple chances. See
No.
what I did there?
Hey, you got the chance, son.
I
All
got the
right.
only chance.
Yeah. The only one that matters.
My only chance. Why don't you tell people where they can find you? Give yourself a little bit of a plug here because this is the currency of podcasting. You come on and give me your time, I give you a
Yeah.
space to plug your stuff. So why
Yeah.
don't you tell people
So
where they can find you?
like I said, all social media at Chance Canary. My company page is at C3 Customs. Um, and my podcast, there's a link tree in my bio on everything, is Chances. And it's got a
Mhm.
picture of me standing with a big question mark. It says Chances on it. And you can find that on any platform.
It's a very good podcast as long as you're not a very sensitive person with
Yeah.
very sensitive fifis.
My opening line is welcome to the island where everyone and anything is welcome. No topic is off limits, but unfortunately that means your feelings are far from safe. So
Yep.
if you're looking to be coddled, don't come my way.
There's no coddling. There's no coddling here, Chance. But there's a lot of. I'll tell you what. There's a lot of motivation and inspiration, and I don't mean the corny kind of like clouds and cool quotes type inspiration. I mean a little bit of an ass kicking, like, "Hey, they did it. I can do it too." And I'll be honest with you. That's what I love about your show so much. So, and that's why I
Appreciate you,
never
man.
miss an episode. So.
Well, you're it's funny because every time I post one, I know in like a 12-hour window of when that goes live, I'm going to get a fire emoji, a thumbs up, or like a small critique, or you're going to share with me what it meant to you or what it helped,
Mhm. I
or
listen to
whatever.
every single episode. The only way you won't get immediate feedback is if I'm driving.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and even at that, man, like
Mhm.
the fact that I'm able to put my and like I'll tell people this. It's not that I know anything like a definite on how to do or not to do.
Mhm.
It's I lead from example of don't do this.
Right.
You
Which
know,
is
I
pretty
can't
powerful stuff to begin with, so
I can't tell you what to do, but I can tell you that fire's hot. You probably don't want to touch it.
I love it. I
Yeah.
love it. Chance Canary, thank you so much for joining me, and I hope everybody will go give you a follow, give you a look, and see what you're up to because you do some really cool stuff. And
I
again, good old butt kicking. Sometimes that's what people need too. A butt kicking is quite a motivator. As my grandfather was a drill sergeant in the army, and there was nothing he thought a kick in the ass couldn't solve.
well, mine
Just
was too.
speaking
So,
of kicks in the ass, I'm going to give you guys a kick in the ass to come back next week and listen again because I don't, as usual, I have no idea who my guest is, but I'll figure something out and there will be an episode. So I hope you'll be by. And until next time, have a great week, everybody, and I'll chat with you then.